He is a retired professor. He is a lover of Baha'u'Llah, a lover of Baha'u'Ullah's faith, and a lover of humanity. This morning he's going to talk about the covenant and its importance. So please welcome Dr. Iraj Khodadoust.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Allah. Dear friends, I'd like to speak with you, or rather share with you some of the holy writings on perhaps the most important topic in religions in general, and in Baha'i faith in particular, the question of the subject of covenant. So what is covenant? Covenant is an agreement, right? Between us and God. Now, Baha'u'llah explains to us that we need to, when we think about covenant, we should think in terms of what he calls the greater covenant and then the smaller covenant, or the lesser covenant. So, what is that greater covenant? Now that subject is so important that Baha'u'llah dedicated one whole book to that subject. And what is that book? The Greater Covenant. And that book is the Book of Certitude, Kitab-i-Iran. That is essentially that idea of the Greater Covenant. Which means that God sends messenger to us approximately once every 1,000 years. But then, because we as human beings are resistant to change, we find some passages in one of the holy writings, and then we say that no, God has sent us this messenger and that's it. No one else. Nobody else, until the end of time. Right? That has happened from the time of Krishna and Buddha and Moses and Jesus and Muhammad and the Bab. And now we have the time. Baha'u'llah has happened over and over again. So in that whole book of over 200 pages, Baha'u'llah explains so clearly as to how all these faiths are related. And Baha'u'llah tells us, if you deny one, you deny all of them. Because they're all chapters of the same book. Because they all come from the same Son of Reality. Because they all give the same message, but then they update it based on the needs of the time, right? So that is the essential message of the Greater Covenant. And so allow me to share with you the words of Baha'u'llah. As I said, it is essentially in the Book of Certitude, and then we see some passages in Gleanings and other tablets of Baha'u'llah. So that's a passage on the question of the Greater Covenant. Consider the former generations. Witness how every time the day star of divine bounty hath shed the light of his revelation upon the world, the people of his day have risen against him and repudiated his truth. They who were regarded as the leaders of men have invariably striven to hinder their followers from turning unto him, who is the ocean of God's limitless bounty. So every time there's a new prophet, they persecute him, they execute him, they crucify him, they don't listen to him, right? Because of humans who resist the change, who resist to understand the newer message, right? So he goes on in saying, behold how the people, as a result of the verdict pronounced by the divines of his age, the ministers and rabbis of that age, have cast Abraham, the friend of God, into fire. How Moses, he who held converse with the Almighty, was denounced as liar and slanderer. Reflect how Jesus, the Spirit of God, was, notwithstanding his extreme meekness and perfect tenderheartedness, treated by his enemies, how he was treated by his enemies. So fierce was the opposition which he, the essence of being and Lord of the visible and invisible, had to face, that he had nowhere to lay his head. He wandered continuously from place to place, deprived of a permanent abode. Ponder that which befell Muhammad, the seal of the prophet, made the life of all else be a sacrifice unto him. How severe the afflictions which the leaders of the Jewish people and the idol worshippers caused to reign upon him, who is the sovereign Lord of all, in consequence of his proclamation of the unity of God and of the truth of his message. And then he concludes that by the righteousness of my cause, my pen groaneth, and all created things weep with a great weeping, as a result of the woes he suffered at the hands of them that have broken the covenant of God, have broken the covenant of God. Which means when we don't accept these messengers of God, when we rise against them, when we persecute them, when we execute them, when we crucify them, we have risen against God, right? That's what he's telling us. So he says, he suffered at the hands of them that have broken the covenant of God, violated his testament, rejected his proofs, and disputed his signs. Thus recount we unto thee the tale of that which happened in days past. Haply thou mayest comprehend. So he's telling us that I'm telling you all these things. Baha'u'llah is telling us we're telling you all these things. So at this age of enlightenment, this age that we have access to all the books, right? Internet, everything else, that we listen more carefully to the message of God, that we read it for ourselves. We all know that, for example, in the Christian tradition, Christians were not allowed to read the Bible, right? For 1,500 years, right? For 1,500 years you were not allowed to read the Bible. The Bible was not even in your language. It was in Greek, right? And the only one who was allowed to read it was the minister. But this is the age of enlightenment. We all have to pick up the book, read the book, see the commonality in religions, and accept the truth for ourselves. Not because somebody else tells us. Whether it is our father or mother or the minister, it doesn't matter. We are all children of the same God. And in the first page of Iran, that book of certitude that I mentioned, Baha'u'llah mentions, asks us to purify our heart, to sanctify our soul. And when we do that, we can begin to understand. So this is his first requirement. Purify your heart, sanctify your soul, and then he shows us the way, which is the same way. And then that is the beginning of the oneness of humankind, right? That we understand that we're all children of the same God. That the message is one and the same, right? And then what is the message for today? Now the message for today, as we saw in Smyrna, we saw in South Carolina, we saw in Chicago, we saw in New York, is first and foremost that there is one race, which is the human race, right?
Yeah.
That if you are prejudiced, whether it's racial prejudice or religious prejudice, you're missing something from the message of God, right?
Yes.
No matter how many churches you go to, how many synagogues you go to, how many mosques you go to, you're not really a real believer, right? You're working against God, which is oneness, which is kindness, which is compassion, which is love, and nothing else. So that is the greater covenant. The whole book we need to study. But then the rest of it is what he calls the lesser covenant. Today, I'd like us to spend the few minutes remaining focusing on what he calls the lesser covenant. As we know, because of immaturity of man, because we were not educated, most of us had not even gone to school, and because writing was not so easily available to everyone, and because of so many other reasons, none of the previous manifestations left a written will, right? None of them. Neither Moses or Jesus, Muhammad. None of them left us with a written will. So what happened as a result? The soonest they passed away or were crucified, division began, right? Hundreds of sects in Christianity, in Islam. One God, one religion, but divided. And what does Baha'u'llah says? That religion should be a cause of love and affection and unity. If it causes division and separation and hatred, what does he say? We are better off without it. If you go to this church or that church, this mosque, that mosque, and then start fighting one another, what's the use of my message? Jesus says, or Muhammad says. You're better off without it. Go to your own home and pray on your own going to this one God, right? You're better off without it. So, I associate with people of all faiths. That's the commandment of Baha'u'llah. But I tell my friends wherever I go that if you preach and teach love and unity and kindness, I'll come back. If I see that you go on the pulpit and you teach hatred, I'm out of here. Is that good enough? Agreeable? So that's basically the message. If I can find some, I'm getting old, I have to bring some notes. Thank you. So, I'm talking about this lesser covenant that Baha'u'llah has given us, and so many books now have been written on the lesser covenant. There are 3 important books by the authors of the Baha'i faith on this lesser covenant, which means now that you see what happened in the past, Baha'u'llah says it's not going to happen now. There is one Baha'i faith, now and forever. And then he tells us also at the end of this book, Leanings, that I'm not let you Baha'is do what you did in the past in the name of Christianity or Islam or whatever else. Every 1,000 years, he says unequivocally, the last passage of this book, we don't have time to read all of that, there'll be a new messenger. Same truth, but updated for the day. Every 1,000 years. And then he says it over and over again in different ways. So that you don't make this mistake that, no, this Baha'i faith is forever. He says, no faith is forever. Same basic truths, but it has to be updated. And the update today for the lesser covenant is that Baha'u'llah says, now for the first time in the history of religion, what will I do? What did he say will do? He said, I will write a book, which is his will, which we call it the Kitab Ahdi. Which means, he said, I write a will that after I pass away, who you should follow. And then he says, everyone cannot have their own interpretations and start their own sect. As soon as you do it, you're not a Baha'i, right? So he said, after I pass away, my eldest son, whose title was Abdul Baha, he would be in charge. And any questions you have, you can ask him. By the way, also for the first time in the history of religion, Baha'u'llah, when he was still on this earth, he said, any question that you have with regard to what I write, you can ask me. Ask me over and over again. Now, this was not the case in the previous religions. You take it or leave it. But here, that's the religion of asking questions. So ask question as long as you like, as long as you're not convinced. And Baha'u'llah said, I'll respond. And then after he passed away, he said that my son, my eldest son, who was with me in jail and incarceration for almost half a century, until he was freed, by the way, when he was 65, 66, and he came to this country. in 1912, then he will respond to your questions, right? And after, so this was called the Book of Ahd, one of Baha'u'llah's books, that specifically says, when I pass away, then he'll be in charge and this and that. And then he says in that Book of Ahd that conflict and contention, what? Is forbidden in this faith. You cannot start arguing about, this is what I said, that's what I said, no, I'm in this sect, I'm in that sect. You have to, if you have a question, fine, ask question. Then when I'm gone, my son Abdullah will respond, right? So, and then when Abdullah passed away, he also left the will, right? Which is called what? The Will and Testament of Abdullah, which again explains what happened in the past, what he did during the years that he was in charge, and then after he passed away, his grandson, that we called him the guardian of the Baha'i faith, Shoghi Effendi, that he would be in charge, right? And then again, if you have differences, send it to him and he will resolve it for you. You cannot begin your own sect, right? And that's what happened. And these guys, these individuals, Abdul Baha and Shoghi Effendi, they left volumes. Go to this bookstore, they have some of them. Not one or two, tens of books, explanation for us to understand the detail of the writings of Baha'u'llah, the details of what religion is all about, how we can bring peace to this divided world, right? All of them, one after another, in oral talks, in written statements, in all different ways. So this is all part of this lesser covenant. And then Shoghi Effendi also left us. It wasn't exactly like the will that we had in the past, but it's also a small book. I hope all the Baha'is have that small book. I should have brought it here for you to see it if you haven't seen it. It's called The Dispensation of Baha'u'llah. Maybe about 80, 90 books, pages. Just like the Will and Testament of Abdullah. And he explains the position of the Bab, Baha'u'llah, Abdul Baha, himself, and after his passing, what we call the Universal House of Justice. For the first time in the history of religion, we have the combination of democracy and all other forms of organizing human beings. Which says, now humanity has reached the age of maturity. Once every 5 years, you get together all across the globe. Elect 9 people from among you. And those 9 people, according to the authority of Baha'u'llah, are able to lead us, and they're infallible when they work together and guide us. And again, if you still have questions, keep on asking. They'll answer. And a poor, insignificant peon like me has also had a couple of questions during the past 50, 60 years. I also sent them letters, and they responded. I'm humbled by it, right? And there were a couple of things that I couldn't understand, and they took the time and responded to it. That is the job. So that this will bring oneness of religion, right? Oneness of humanity. It would make us understand the importance of this amazing faith. Now, among the books which are written about covenant, I'd like to mention 3 in particular. When you read these 3 books that I mentioned, that is, in addition to the Book of Certitude and the Book of Ahd and the Will and Testament of Abdullah and Dispensation of Baha'u'llah by Shoghi Effendi, then there are 3 books written in particular about the question of covenant. 2 by Adib Taherzadeh. Has any one of you seen those 2 books? One is called The Covenant, and the other one is called The Child of the Covenant. It's only about 1,000 pages. So, wonderful read. As to how solid this covenant is, this faith, that it will not be broken again. It will not disintegrate like past times, because we have reached the age of maturity. And then another shorter one, maybe about 300 pages, by Shaheen Baha'i, which is also on the question covenant. These are important read after we read those other things. But equally important, but perhaps more important than reading these books, is our Ruhi book series, right? Any one of you has taken book 8, which is on the covenant? Some of you have. And book 8 is the only book which is in 3 volumes, right? Book 8:1, book 8:2, book 8:3, which is all about the covenant. And so, because it's so important, because that's the most important topic in the Baha'i faith, because that keeps unity and integrity among Baha'is and therefore across the globe. Right? And so this is very important. So I have put here 3 words that I'd like us to revisit and emphasize. That this covenant then brings total unity to the humankind. This means unity of classes, of races, of nations, of religions through covenant. That's how important it is. If we truly understand covenant, we understand the vision of Baha'u'Llah, which is oneness of mankind. So that's how important it is. Unity, then, in terms of all of these things. The next point that Shoghi Effendi explains in terms of the importance of covenant is that it provides integrity to the faith. Integrity. And then he says that this integrity is provided through 3 means. That's interesting. And these 3 means are what? What he calls scripture, because it's not hearsay anymore. And we all know that, again, because of immaturity of man and because of lack of availability of writing at the time, and because most of these manifestations of God were illiterate, right? Jesus could not read or write. So what happened? What they say they said was composed and written when? 50, 60, 70, or 200 years after they passed away. The Old Testament was composed by hundreds of people in the course of 1,400 years, right? So I remember this couple, there was a man and woman, who were sincere believers. They came to my door one day and they said, "Do you know why we die so early?" I said, "What do you mean?" And she said that, we used to live to be 800 years old or 900 years old, but now the maximum we can live is 90 years. I said, "What?" And so she opens the Bible, and here said that this guy lived to be 900 years old, this guy lived to be 950 years, and so on. I said, could there be deeper meaning in these things? Could it be that this was not written by Jesus or Moses and these things? And she says, "No, I don't care. This is in the Bible. That's what I believe." So, none of those books were composed by the authors of those faith. So we need to believe in the spirit of the Bible. But then if you start reading from the first page that the world was created in 6 days, and the 7th day God rested, and then the man was created, and then from his rib, woman was created, and all that, that doesn't make a lot of sense, right? A lot of them are stories or parables, or because we were immature, therefore they were given stories. A lot of them were not really the exact word of Moses or Jesus, right? So we have to read them with a grain of salt. We need to use our judgment. But now for the first time, all these 100 volumes are written by the authors of this book. So he says the authority of the faith then is the scripture. Second, interpretation. Authorized interpretation. Who were the authorized interpreters? Abdul Baha and Shoghi Effendi, right? The third one, he says elucidation, which is what? Which is what now, universal justice, who guide us, they don't interpret anymore, because all the interpretation that we need was given in the course of almost 100 years from time Baha'u'llah until Shoghi Effendi passed away. And then from then on, what universal justice does is explaining more, right? No more interpretation. There's a difference there that way, so is discussion. So that's the other thing Shoghi Effendi mentions is that this is the only time that understanding the covenant and what covenant does provides flexibility for us. And how does that flexibility is brought about? Flexibility. It means that whenever universal justice thinks that the law is appropriate, they institute a new law for a particular reason. Whenever they think it needs to be repealed, they would repeal it, right? So therefore, it provides flexibility in the religion. So all of these things. So if there's anything, how many more minutes do I have? Do I have any more minutes?
I would say yes, but is Harold in here?
5 minutes? 5 minutes.
There you are.
I thought my time is up, but okay. So with the 5 minutes, let's make sure that that these words stick with us. That the covenant provides unity, integrity, and flexibility. And in terms of integrity, it's the scripture, the interpretation, the elucidations that are important. Let's remember the greater covenant, that all religions are from the same, are chapters of the same book. That's the covenant, that within this faith there's no division ever is allowed or permitted or ever happens. Let us remember the three sources of the covenant, the Blessed Covenant, the Book of Ahd, the Will and Testament of Baha, and the Dispensation of Baha'u'Llah by Shoghi Effendi. And I came across this passage from, or just parts of this passage from Abdul Baha, which is so beautiful, illustrates the importance of the covenant. He says, the covenant provides conclusive testimony. It is the universal balance. It is magnet of God's grace. It is the irrefutable testament that the Almighty God has provided for humanity. And with all that, let me end with a short passage from Baha'u'llah, which we have it in the gleanings again, but it is the first page of the most holy book, Kitab al-Aqdas, as to what our duties are in conjunction with the covenant and in conjunction with being a Baha'i. He says, the first duty prescribed by God for his servants is the recognition of him who is the dayspring of his revelation and the fountain of his laws. Which means that every time there's a new manifestation, and now it's the time of Baha'u'llah, you need to understand him and accept him. And he says, who representeth the Godhead in both the kingdom of his cause and the world of creation. So he says he's in charge, right?
Yes.
Every 1,000 years, there's new manifestation is in charge. Same truth, but updated. Then he says, whoso achieveth this duty hath attained unto all good. If you have really understood it, you have attained all good. And whoso is deprived thereof hath gone astray. Though he may be the author of every righteous deed. You know, many people say, I do all good, whatever I do, why do I need religion? No matter how much good we do, unless we humble ourselves, right? Until we become obedient to the laws of God. Baha'u'llah says it's not good enough, right? So then he says, it behooveth everyone who reaches this utmost sublime station, the summit of transcendent glory, to observe every ordinance of him who is the desire of the world. So if you now understand, accept it, now read my book, which is the Book of Laws, and obey these laws. What are these laws? Prayers, meditation, fasting, and all the rest. Without it, it's not good enough, right? Human mind we may at times become arrogant. We think we're somebody, but that somebody is God, right?
Yes.
And we need to humble ourselves before Him. Almost the end of it. So he says, these twin duties, which means accepting God, His manifestation, and obeying His laws. These are the twin duties. These twin duties are inseparable. Neither is acceptable without the other. Thus hath it been decreed by Him who is the source of divine inspiration. Thank you very much. I hope we learned something about covenant. Because of the
قل الله يكفي عن كل شيء قل الله يكفي عن كل شيء ولا يتوكلون متوكلون God is sufficient unto me. He is the all-sufficing. God is sufficient unto me. He is the all-sufficing. Let the trusting trust. Let the trusting trust. Let the trusting trust. Let the trusting trust.